We've been talking for a few Sundays now, maybe even for a few months, we've been talking about the letter to Ephesians, right? And the letter to Ephesians talks a lot about grace. So we've been talking many times here this year about the grace of God and how grace transforms us, transforms our personalities, transforms our characters, transforms the way how we relate to other people. And if you remember, last time we were talking about wives and how grace transforms a wife's character. If you remember, Pastor Michael was the one who preached on the subject. And by the way, the next Sunday we're going to have Father's Day, right? I think we're excited about this. Well, at least I'm excited because finally I expect that my kids will kind of somehow will celebrate me. So, well, we've been given to our kids, and finally, at least one day a year, maybe they will give something to us. But anyways, before you can become a father, you need to become a husband first, right? And God talks to husbands and how husbands should be. God talks a lot about this, and the letter to Ephesians is also not an exception. We're going to cover the passage today which addresses specifically husbands and how grace transforms a husband's character. But before we transition into that, I recollect a story which happened at one of the weddings and at one of the wedding receptions. As usually there is a host, and the host would do some, games or contests and things like that. So at one of such, at a wedding, the host actually invited a few men to come forward to the stage. And he said, we're going to have a contest now, but before we go to the contest, I want you guys to be blatantly honest, and I need to split you into groups. So he put a row of chairs on one side and a row of chairs on another side, and he said, so if in your family you are the leader, take a seat on this side. If in your family your wife is the leader, then take a seat on this side. So surprisingly, all men except for one sat on this side. And the host was very surprised, and he's like, wow, that's pretty unusual. So he started talking to this guy and said, hey, looks like you are an exception. What happened here? How this happened that you are the only one who is the leader out of all of these men in the family? And he said, well, I don't really know. My wife told me to take a seat here. So I believe that's not the case in our families, right? And actually, one of the things that we're going to cover today is going to be about leadership as well. So let's read this passage from the letter to Ephesians chapter 5. And we actually will cover the passage that Pastor Michael talked about last Sunday. And this is just to give us the perspective and the context to the chapter, to the passage we are going to talk about today. So we can even start with Ephesians 5:22, which says, and which starts with addressing wives. Wives, submit to your own husbands as to the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, even as Christ is the head of the church, his body, and is himself its Savior. Now, as the church submits to Christ, so also wives should submit to everything to their husbands. Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, that he might sanctify her, having cleansed her with the washing of water with the word, so that he might present the church to himself in splendor, without spot or wrinkle or any such thing, that she might be holy and without blemish. In the same way, husbands should love their wives as their own bodies. He who loved his wife loves himself. He who loves his wife loves himself. For no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it, just as Christ does the church, because we are members of his body. Therefore, a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. This mystery is profound, and I am saying that it refers to Christ and the church. However, let each one of you love his wife as himself, and let the wife see that she respects her husband. Friends, this is a very interesting passage and maybe even uncomfortable for some people, especially in the modern age when we live in the age of feminism, when they preach that a man and a wife, or a husband and a wife, or a man and a woman, they're equal, they have the same rights, which we basically don't argue that they have the same rights, but in a family there is a specific order. And we're going to talk about this, and we will see that God's plan for the family, or in this passage, God's plan in this passage consists of two things, and we will cover both of them. Just the first one is God's plan for the family, so we can see the perspective, and then we'll transition to talking about God's plan for husbands. So when we are looking and when we research on God's plan for the family in the Bible, we can see three main principles. And the first principle is that Christ leads the husband and the husband leads the wife. There is a certain hierarchy in the family, and God said that God has a plan for how the family should be structured. Unfortunately, there is no secular college or university that teaches that. Unfortunately, the only place where you can look for this information is the Holy Scripture, is the Bible. This is the source of this information, and this is the source how a family should be, how the family should look like. Unfortunately, people don't study this, don't learn this, and for that reason, lots of families around us, they fail. People divorce. They try and they can't do that without God. And this is, or without following God's plan for the family. And we can read this from 1 Corinthians 11:3. But I want you to understand, says Apostle Paul, that the head of every man is Christ, the head of wife is her husband, and the head of Christ is God. So basically, he is talking about the hierarchy. He says that the head of everything is God the Father. Christ is the one who is under him. Then there is the husband, and then there is the wife. And he says that if the husband leads his wife, it should be the same way as God the Father leads Christ, or how God how Christ obeys his Father. According to God's design, the husband should be the head in the family relationship, and that does not mean that a husband can do whatever he wants. If he follows God's principles, if he follows what God told, what Christ did to the church, to his bride, basically, then he won't try to do whatever he wants. He won't be a tyrant in the family. He won't be the one who will be trying to lead by harsh methods and trying to do something that his wife wouldn't like, or something that would make his wife upset or make her unhappy in the marriage. Because leadership, someone said that leadership is more of an art than science. It is rather art than science, and because there are no specific procedure that you could write out and you can say, okay, if you follow these steps, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, then you will have a perfect marriage, or you will be a perfect husband. Unfortunately, there is no instruction like that, because we all have unique personalities and we all are not perfect. And for that reason, there are situations in my family which you guys don't have, or you have situations which I don't have in my family. But Bible reveals the principles which we can follow, and if we follow these principles, we will succeed in our marriage, will be happy. So that basically says that husband can lead can lead his wife correctly only when he follows God's pattern or God's example. The second principle is basically the same, but it's just stated in the opposite way. The wife submits to her husband, and the husband submits to Christ. So if the first principle about leadership, the one who should lead, the other person should submit. If there is no submission, there is no leadership. Would you agree with this? If there is no submission, there is no leadership. You can't lead someone who doesn't submit to you, who doesn't follow your instructions or your orders or your suggestions. It's impossible. For that reason, when you have a leader, the other person should be subject to that leader and should submit. So Bible clearly says that wives should submit to their husbands, but it shouldn't be just an absolute submission. It should be submission as the church submits to Christ. And we read this in passage 24, and Pastor Michael covered that passage last Sunday, and he talked about this, what biblical submission means for wives. And the third principle is that the husband loves his wife, and the wife respects her husband. In some translations, it even says that the wife should fear her husband, and it is not that kind of fear when the wife would try to hide from her husband because she is scared of him. Whenever he comes home from work or from a gathering with his friends, the wife will just try to escape him, just try to hide somewhere, not to be beaten up or not to get into a conflict or a problem. That's not kind of the fear that God in the Bible talks about. It talks more about the respect. When God has this reverent fear or respect to her husband, and she can respect him. There are a lot of things, there are a lot of people who talk about the secret of family life or the secret of the family success. Or a successful marriage, the secret of a successful marriage. I think I even saw a seminar which was on the subject, and it was called "The Secret of a Successful Marriage." Friends, as a matter of fact, it's no longer a secret. It's not a secret. It's revealed in the Bible, and actually, this is exactly this principle that when a husband loves his wife, and when the wife respects her husband, that's the secret sauce to a successful marriage. And that's God's plan, which is revealed exactly in this passage that we are covering today. That's God's plan for the family. And as we have covered the perspective and we looked at the family altogether, now we can look at God's plan for a husband in relation to his wife. And we can see that this passage, beginning from verse 25 through verse 33, it covers three principles: how a husband can successfully and happily lead his wife, or what God's plan for his wife is. And the first one is love your wife as Christ. Love your wife as Jesus Christ. Nowadays, and in the church, you probably hear all the time that people are talking about following Christ, about following his example. Be like Jesus Christ, follow Jesus Christ. And because we speak a lot about this, unfortunately, it kind of becomes some sort of a habitual thing, so that it's kind of, this phrase kind of gets devalued, and we don't really put the meaning in this phrase. It's like, remember like in that story when a pastor decided to visit the Sunday school where, the kids were, and he wanted to do something, unusual. So he brought a picture of a squirrel, and he's like showing that picture to the kids and says, "Hey, can you tell me what you can see on the picture?" And all the kids became silent. They didn't know what to say. And he's like, "Okay, so what's the answer?" And finally, one little boy was like, "I know that the correct answer is Jesus Christ, but it looks like squirrel." So I don't want us to just say those things because it's the right thing to say. We need to mean what we say. And I really want us to think about loving our wives, and each husband should love his wife as Christ loved the church. We also know that love is a decision, is a feeling, as any other feelings that you know. But besides being just a feeling, love is also a decision. You make a decision to love your wife. And when you take it as a decision, it helps you go through the, low periods of life or low periods of your marriage, because it's not a secret that sometimes in a marriage, not everything is perfect, that sometimes people get in an argument and get, there may be a conflict. But when you don't drive yourself only by your feelings, because one day you may feel love, another day you may feel frustration or be upset about your wife or something that she did, that doesn't mean that you should change or that you should divorce, that you should change everything that you've built so far. So it is a decision to remain faithful, to follow the rules of your marriage, to do the right thing. This is a decision. So this is what God has called us for, because He loved the church Himself. And He loved it. The reason we're talking that we should love our wives as Jesus Christ loved the church is because His life is sacrificial. This is the main difference. His life is sacrificial. He sacrificed everything He had for the church. And He sacrificed not only His glory, as we read in the Bible, that He left the glory of heaven and He came down to earth. The God of the universe, the God who had everything in His possession, He left it behind to come to the earth, to be born as a man. And he didn't give up just that part. He gave Himself up for His bride, for the church. This is the sacrifice He did. On the street where we live, one of the neighbors, it's a nice family. We moved in 5 years ago, and little by little, we started getting acquainted with our neighbors, and we noticed that this is a really good family to be friends with. So we kind of started talking, just like neighbors. And we kind of, over time, we realized that they are Christians, that this is a Christian family. They had 3 kids. He was in the military. He was more of a stay-at-home mom. And one day, we realized that we haven't seen her for quite some time. She kind of just disappeared. And we started to worry about her and about them as a family, because days were passing, weeks were passing, and we didn't see her outside. We didn't see her around. So it was awkward to ask. So we started kind of assuming bad things. Maybe she got sick, or maybe she moved, or maybe they divorced. What happened? We don't know. And then maybe 4 or 5 months passed, and she unexpectedly showed up. And she went outside, and we saw her at the street. We started talking, and she told us the story, and that was a really interesting story. She said that a family of their friends, they had a baby a year ago, and the child was born with a liver pathology. So by the age of 1, his liver started failing. This little baby, little kid, his liver started failing. And the doctors basically told that if he doesn't get a liver transplant immediately, this kid will die. So his parents and relatives started taking tests, because that liver, there are a lot of medical conditions for that and requirements, and so there should be some sort of compatibility. And none of his parents and close relatives, none of them were compatible with this little kid's liver. So this lady, she decided to take the test, and guess what? Her liver was compatible with this kid. And she decided to sacrifice her liver to give it to this little baby. And she said that she knew that it would be difficult. The doctors warned her and they told her that the recovery will be very, very difficult. But she said, I didn't realize how bad it would be. So she basically stayed in bed for several months just because she couldn't even move her body. That's how bad it was. But she sacrificed a part of her liver to give to this baby to save his life. And you know, when I heard the story, I was so moved. I was like, how? It's not even your own baby. But she decided to give her liver up for this baby. Friends, this is a great example of sacrifice, right? And Christ did not give a part of his liver for us. He didn't even give the entire liver for us. He gave himself up for us. And he said, love your wife as Christ loved the church. Love your wife exactly in this way. And if you love your wife in this way, she will be happy to follow your lead. She will be happy to obey you. She will be happy to be subject to you, to subordinate to you, because your love will be exactly as the way how Jesus loved the church. Also, we can read in Colossians 3:19, we read, husbands, love your wives and do not be harsh with them. There is a kind of like a popular opinion or general opinion that in the old age, women didn't really mean a lot, or they didn't have any rights. And that's kind of true. And they were like people of second grade or something like this. So when Apostle Paul wrote those letters, his letters, and the subject of the relationship and the subject of women is brought up in many of them, and he says that love your wives and do not be harsh with them. That was sort of a revolution at that age, because it meant basically treat your husband equally. Because, and Apostle Paul says, this is because God created you equal and God wanted you to be equal. Yes, there is this structure in the family when the wife is supposed to obey the husband in the family, but at the same time, the wife is also valuable, equally valuable to God. What does it mean not to be harsh? That, guys, tenderness towards our wife is exactly what many of us lack. Is exactly that we are trying to, sometimes even people try to be manly and they overdo it. They kind of, try to be harsh to other people or to women, to their wife. And that's not what God called us to be. That's not who we are supposed to be. God actually tells that a gentle, in Proverbs we read, a gentle tongue is a tree of life, but perversiveness in it breaks the spirit. So this is even in the Old Testament. Solomon said that a gentle tongue is a tree of life. What does it mean? A tree of life. What does it mean? It means that this is the tree from which you can get fruits, you can eat, and you can survive, basically. It's a tree of life. This is when you talk gently. And I think in the first place, it applies to the marriage. It applies to the family life. And if we as husbands, and if we remain gentle to our wives, as it is written in the subject, in this passage, then it will help us build the relationship in the right way and build them in the right perspective. The second principle here is love your wife as yourself. And it is also written here, love as your own body. This is what we just read in this passage. And I'm not sure if you noticed, but maybe about 10 years ago, a new teaching surfaced, which is called, it's a teaching about selfish love. And basically this teaching, in a nutshell, says that in order to love other people, you must love yourself first. Have you heard about this? You guys probably heard this teaching, right? And maybe it appeared earlier, but I heard about this first time about 10 years ago. And even a Christian singer, Natalie Grant, wrote a song which has the lyrics like this. It's hard to stand on shifting sand. It's hard to shine in the shadows of the night. You can't be free if you don't reach for help. And you can't love if you don't love yourself. And it sounds so pleasing, so appealing to you that, oh, right, I should love myself. But friends, this is a heresy and delusion. This is a lie. There is nothing in the Bible about this. In fact, Bible does not speak about that you should love yourself at all, at all. Bible speaks a lot about loving your neighbor, about loving your wife, about loving your children, and even loving your enemy. But Bible doesn't speak at all about loving yourself, that you should love yourself. And someone turned this upside down and said, wait, before you can love your children or you can love your wife or your neighbors, stop for a moment and think how much you love yourself. But you know what? The Bible reveals this, and Bible actually says that God has already embedded this self-love, sufficient self-love to ourselves in our nature. It's already there, because this is what we read here, and we can read it again in verse 28, I believe. Sorry. It's written here that, excuse me, I've lost the passage here. So that he who loves his wife loves himself. For no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it, just as Christ does the church. Excuse me, I was looking a little bit in a different passage, but it was lower down in verse 29. And it says that we already have sufficient love for ourselves, for our body, because we nourish and we cherish our body. It's not just we take care about it. The words which are selected, which are used here, is that we nourish and cherish our body. That means that we have sufficient love for ourselves, for our own body. And God says that if you love others the way how you love yourself, you will do great. You will do just great. Just try to love other people at the same level as you love yourself. That's going to be enough. Because we all love ourselves. We don't want just to eat some food. We want to eat good food. We want to eat delicious food. We want, for example, when we dress ourselves, we don't want to dress just, rugs or something that would be kind of, you will be ashamed to walk outside. No, we all want to wear nice clothes, right? Good clothes, because we love ourselves. And this is why God says that love your wife as you love yourself. Loving your wife as yourself also means to take care of the needs of your wife, the same as we take care of the needs of our body. It also means to oversee your wife, to help her open up, to help her show her gifts and the holy gifts, the gifts of the Holy Spirit that she has, to help her reveal her talents that she has. This is everything about nourishing and cherishing your wife. This is the second principle that God tells us about how husband should act in a relationship with, in a family relationship. And the third principle that we will cover today, which we can also see in this passage, is about loving your wife, which means detaching from your parents and holding fast to your wife. This is what we read in this passage, and God said that it is actually the greatest. Apostle Paul says that this is a great secret, a great mystery. He says that this applies not only to a husband and a wife; it also applies to God and the church. He says that it's also the same kind of mystery, and even for Apostle Paul, it was a mystery. Why? Because God, detached from his Holy Father, came down to earth to save the church, to make the church for himself, to sacrifice himself for the church, and to hold fast to this church. And this is what he's doing today. He's holding fast to us. He loves us. He loved us so much that he died for us. And he says that if I died for you, if I did this for you, if I'm holding fast to the church, you should hold fast to your wife as well. And it's interesting that this sort of relationship doesn't happen just between friends. For example, if I have friends, I have really good friends, but that doesn't mean that I should detach from my parents just because I have friends and just spend time with my friends. No, it doesn't work that way. But when I get married, this is a completely different type of relationship. And in this relationship, God says that for this relationship to be successful, for the marriage to be successful, you need to detach or you need to leave your parents and attach to your wife and basically cling on to your wife and try to be with your wife and be for your wife. It doesn't mean that you forget about your parents, you don't respect them, they don't mean anything for you. No, that doesn't mean at all. But now your love, if your main love was previously, it was directed at your parents, now it should be directed at your wife. And listen, what Apostle Peter says in 1 Peter 3:7, he says, also likewise, husbands, live with your wives in an understanding way, showing honor to the woman as the weaker vessel, since they are heirs with you of the grace of life, so that your prayers may not be hindered. That's a very interesting passage. Apostle Peter, the same way as Apostle Paul, says that wife has a great value in the family. Moreover, he says that live with your wife in an understanding way, meaning that you need to have really good fellowship and communication with your wife so that you guys don't have any hindrance in your prayers. It appears that if you're in a conflict with your wife, your prayers can't be heard. If you don't have the relationship with your wife in the right way, if you do not hold fast onto her and you don't have the unity with your wife, your spiritual life will suffer and likely it will fail because you don't have the right relationship with your wife. For that reason, he says, live with your wives in an understanding way, showing honor to the woman as the weaker vessel. He admits and he acknowledges that our wives are not as strong as we are. They are weaker. It works both in terms of their emotions, in terms of their physical condition, and different other, and maybe psychologically, when you're going through tough periods of life, some difficult life circumstances can break your wife. They can break her down completely because just they are weaker. They can't sustain as much as you can. So our responsibility as the husbands to protect our wives because they are the weaker vessel. This is what we write here. So we must encourage them. We must honor them. We must spend time and build the relationship with them in the right way as God loved. So in conclusion, as God loved all of us. Excuse me. In conclusion, just to summarize everything that we've been talking about, I want to say that, guys, If you don't take leadership for your family today, it's a sin. You are living in a sin. If you don't take responsibility for your family, if you don't love your wife the way how God loved the church, you're living a sinful life. Because love is an everyday appearance of your feelings and of your decision. And if you don't love your wife as you should, then you can't complain that your wife doesn't subordinate to you. If you love your wife with the sacrificial life as Jesus loved the church, believe me, any wife will be happy to be subordinate to you because she will see this example, she will see this genuine love. She will see that you're not trying to just take advantage of her and just try to use her for, I don't know, either for sexual needs or for some household needs, to put food on the table or to make food, to cook for you. She will see that you are all for her. She will see that you're ready to sacrifice yourself for her. And any wife will be absolutely happy with that. Friends, our goal is for grace of God to be manifested in every family. This is what actually God reveals through the letter of Ephesians. He wants the grace of God to be manifested in every family, through the life of every family. And if we as men want to be the reflection of God's mercy, of God's grace, what we need to do is we need to follow the lead of Jesus Christ, the same way as He follows the lead of His Father. And this is the way how we can lead our family. May God bless all of us. Amen. Let's stand up and pray.